Part 1. She fired me on a Tuesday at 9 in the morning in the glass room where we used to plan the whole year. I knew it was coming. I'd known for 3 months. What I didn't know was that she'd read it off a page. Eleanor Vance does not read off pages. In 12 years, I watched her gut a board presentation from memory, name every number, name every risk, never blink, never a note card. She built Hale Dynamics on the idea that if you needed to read it, you didn't understand it. Today, she had a printed statement squared up in front of her. 2 people from HR stood against the glass wall like witnesses at a signing, and she looked at that paper more than she looked at me. "Julian," she said, "thank you for coming in." "Of course," I said. That was my entire first response. 2 words. I decided on the ride up that I wasn't going to give her anything to work with, and 2 words was already generous. She began to read. After a thorough review of the department's strategic direction, and in the interest of pursuing a more synergistic leadership structure going forward, Hale Dynamics has made a difficult decision to end Julian Thorne's tenure as Senior Vice President of Strategy, effective immediately. I let it sit in the air a moment, then I said, "You wrote Julian Thorne instead of you." She glanced up. "What?" "You said end Julian Thorne's tenure. I'm sitting right here. You'd normally say end your tenure." I kept my voice flat, almost helpful. It reads like it was written by someone who wasn't planning to be in the room. Her jaw did something small and precise. She didn't answer. She turned to the second page instead, which told me I was right and that she wasn't going to admit it in front of HR. The word synergistic was the tell. Eleanor hated that word. She used to circle it in red on every deck and write "say what you mean" in the margin in block letters. Whoever built this statement didn't know her well enough to know that, which meant she'd handed her own firing script to a man who thought synergy was a strategy instead of a word you use when you don't have one. "There's a severance package outlining the folder," she said. "Standard terms. We'd ask you to sign the acknowledgement today before you leave." "Standard terms," I repeated. "All right. You can have counsel review it, that's your right. We just prefer to close this cleanly." "I'm sure you would." I opened the folder. I read exactly 1 page, the one that mattered, the paragraph that said the termination took effect the moment I signed. I did not read it because I was worried. I read it because I wanted to be sure of one thing, and the thing was the date. The date was today. Good. I clicked the pen and signed my name. No pause, no reread, no counteroffer, no question I already knew the answer to. I've watched 100 people sign things they were afraid of, and they all do the same dance. They hover. They reread the same line twice. They ask about a clause to feel like they still have leverage. I signed like I was confirming a dinner reservation for 2. One of the HR people shifted against the glass. A small sound, a shoe on the floor. They'd been briefed to expect a scene, the raised voice, the "after everything I did for this company," the storming out. There wasn't going to be a scene. There was the first thing that was going to go wrong for them today, and it was the smallest. "I'll have security escort you to the lobby," Eleanor said. "That won't be necessary. It's company policy. Then it's policy for people who make it necessary." I closed the folder and slid it back to the center of the table, squared to the edge, the way she likes things. "I'll clear my personal items now. There isn't much." "Mr. Thorne," one of the HR witnesses started, gentle, rehearsed. "If you need time to gather your—" "I have a box," I stood. "I brought it this morning." That landed in the room and nobody knew where to put it. I'd brought a box to my own firing. Let them make of that what they wanted. The truth was simpler than whatever they'd invent. I'd known the date because I'd chosen the conditions, and the man who knows the date packs the night before. I picked the box up off the floor by the door, 1 banker's box, already packed, a framed photo, a coffee mug, a backup drive that was mine and not theirs. Everything of actual value had walked out of this building weeks ago, quietly, in ways nobody logged. The box was for the optics. Even a clean exit needs a prop, and people trust a man carrying a box more than a man carrying nothing. I let myself look, once, at the wall behind her. There was a framed document hanging there, the original founding filing for Hale Dynamics, matted in cream, hung the year we opened, back when it was a we, and the office was 1 floor and a leaking radiator. People assume my name is on that filing. It isn't. It never was. I built the thing that made the company defensible, but I built it in my own name, on purpose, because a man who has been poor once learns to keep the deed in a drawer he controls. That detail was about to matter more than everything else in this building combined. I gave it half a second, then I turned away before anyone could follow my eyes. "Do you have everything?" Eleanor asked. Boardroom precise, controlled. She'd practiced this in the mirror, or in the car, or across a pillow from the man who wrote the statement. "I do." I reached the door, then turned back once, the way you do when you've forgotten to say a thing. I hadn't forgotten anything, I just wanted her to remember this part. "Eleanor, The word synergy was in that statement twice.
You used to cut it in edits.
She didn't answer. Her jaw tightened by about a millimeter, the same millimeter it moved when a deal was slipping and she was deciding whether to save it or let it die. Thank you for the 12 years, I said. Not, thank you for the opportunity. Not, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for the time. 12 years is a fact that's much harder to argue with than a feeling, and it lands later at 2 in the morning when the feelings have gone to bed. I let the specificity do the work, and I walked out. Behind me, I heard nothing. No parting shot, no last word, no door slam, because I was the one leaving, and I don't slam doors. I fired people myself. I know the look those 2 HR witnesses were wearing over the closed folder on the table. It's the look of 2 professionals who just watched something go completely, quietly wrong and can't name which part. The part that went wrong was that I said thank you and meant it. And there was the other thing, the thing the room hadn't noticed yet. Ethan Reed wasn't in it. The man who spent 3 months convincing Eleanor I was replaceable, the man who wrote synergistic and thought it was a knife, did not have the standing to sit in the chair when the sentence was carried out. He arranged the execution and skipped the execution. He sent her in with his words in her mouth and stayed wherever men like him stay on the morning their plan comes due. I noticed his absence the way you notice a missing load-bearing beam, not by what's there, by what the ceiling is doing. His empty chair told me he thought the hard part was already over. He thought firing me was the whole job. He was about to learn that firing me was the easy part, and that he'd removed the one person who knew exactly where every wall in that building was quietly cracking. The elevator was waiting when I reached it, doors open, one security guard inside with his thumb on the hold button. "Lobby?" he asked. "Lobby, thanks." The doors closed on 41 floors. I watched the numbers fall and thought about how many nights I'd ridden this exact car up in the dark to fix a thing nobody knew was breaking. A contract 3 days from lapsing. A client who was one bad phone call from walking to a competitor. A patent filing a junior lawyer nearly submitted under the company name instead of mine, one Sunday 3 years ago, that I corrected before Monday and never mentioned to anyone. Small saves, the load-bearing kind, the kind nobody sees until the wall they're holding up is gone. Nobody rides an elevator down from his own firing this settled. I noticed it about myself the way you notice the weather through a window, from a distance, without much feeling. "Rough morning, huh?" the guard said, nodding at the box. "You could say that. You want me to radio down, get you a car to the door?" I considered it. 1 full beat. He was watching me with the plain, unforced kindness of a man who has held this elevator for a lot of people on the worst mornings of their lives, and learned to offer the small thing, the car, because it's the only thing he can offer. "No," I said. "I have one." He nodded like that was a completely normal thing to hear. Maybe it was. Maybe everybody has a car. He was a good man. His name was on his badge, and I'd said good morning to him for 12 years, and he'd said it back every time. I almost told him to update his resume before Hale Dynamics got around to asking him to. The company was about to have a very expensive quarter, and good men on hourly wages are the first thing that gets cut when the numbers turn. I decided it was no longer my department to say so. "Everything okay, though?" he asked near the bottom. "Not policy. He just meant it." "Professionally?" I said. "Never better." He nodded a third time. The doors opened on the marble lobby, and I walked out through the light and the revolving door and did not look back at the desk where I'd badged in for 12 years. I didn't need to. The badge was in the box. The box was already lighter than it looked. I went home. I didn't celebrate. There's nothing to celebrate on the day a plan stops being a plan. It's only halfway to a win, and halfway is where most plans die. I made coffee I didn't drink. People picture the fired man's first night as a bottle and a dark window and a long list of things he should have said in the room. Mine wasn't that. I'd said everything I needed to say in the room, which was almost nothing, and I'd said it on purpose. The night after you're fired is only unbearable if the firing surprised you. Mine had a date on it that I'd chosen the terms of 3 months earlier, and a lease with my signature already drying across the street, and a single email on its way that would turn a decade of borrowed leverage back into mine. There is a particular calm available only to the person who arranged the trap he's standing in. It isn't happiness. It's more like the quiet of a man who has checked his work and found it correct. I sat at the desk in the corner of my apartment with one lamp on, laptop open, and I waited for the only email that mattered. It came in at 9:47 that night, from my lawyer. 1 sentence. "Confirmed. The license is voided as of the date of termination. The firm is yours to proceed. I read it once. I did not read it twice. Reading it twice would have meant I doubted it, and I didn't. I'm not going to explain the machinery because the machinery is dull and the result is not. Here is the result. 3 things Hale Dynamics builds its entire product on do not belong to Hale Dynamics anymore. They never did. They were mine, borrowed on terms tied to one signature, my employment. That employment ended at 9:04 this morning when Eleanor signed her name directly under mine on a page a stranger wrote for her. She didn't fire me. She handed me back the keys and thought she was changing the locks. I closed the laptop. I turned off the lamp. I went to sleep and I slept the whole night through, which is not what a man does on the day he loses everything. It's what a man does on the day a long wait finally, quietly, ends. The next morning, a delivery truck was double parked on Fenwick Street, hazards ticking, 2 guys in grey hoodies carrying folding chairs and flat-packed desks through a propped open glass door. Above the door, a sign had been lit sometime in the last 24 hours. Clean type, no logo, no nonsense. Marcus Cole Advisors. I got there a little after 8 with a coffee somebody on the crew had pushed into my hand. I stood on the sidewalk and looked up at my own name in light, and I did not smile. Smiling is for men who are surprised by good news. I checked my watch instead, out of habit, then I went to hold the door for the one carrying the desk sideways through it. "Where do you want the chairs?" he asked.
The back office. Which back office?
The one with the window. That was the whole of my conversation that morning. There was a great deal to do, desks, phones, the 3 client calls I hadn't solicited and now wouldn't have to make because they would make them to me by Thursday. But right then there was only the truck, the chairs, and the window. The window mattered because of what it faced. Directly across Fenwick Street, 41 floors of glass caught the early sun, and behind one pane on a high floor, a woman who arrives before everyone because she has always arrived before everyone was standing very still. Eleanor Vance, at her boardroom window, coffee going cold in her hand, looking down at a delivery truck and a lit sign and a name she read off a page yesterday like it belonged to someone she'd never met. Marcus Cole Advisors. She didn't move. She read it the way you read a sentence that won't parse, twice, 3 times, waiting for the letters to rearrange into something that made sense. They didn't. So she told herself the thing people tell themselves when the ground shifts and they're not ready to feel it. He must have had something lined up. It doesn't mean anything yet. She was half right. He had something lined up. On a screen, mine, across the street, not hers, a document sat open in a quiet window. A commercial lease. The property. The building she was staring down into from 41 floors up. The signature at the bottom. Mine. In the same flat hand I'd used on her termination folder the day before. The date, stamped and notarized at the top of the page, 3 months ago. She fired me yesterday. I had signed the lease on the office across the street from hers a full season before she ever picked up Ethan's little statement and read it to me off the page. I wasn't scrambling. I was never scrambling. I let them pull the trigger on a plan I had already finished building, down to the coffee and the lit sign and the window that looks into her window. She just didn't know it yet. She would. Part 2. Here's what happened across the street while I was signing my first client. I wasn't in the room. I didn't need to be. I'd built the room. Daniel Sanchez had been Hale Dynamics' chief operating officer for 6 years, and in 6 years he had never once knocked on Eleanor's door holding a single sheet of paper. Memos came by email. Bad news came in a deck. A single printed page in a man's hand means only one thing in a company like that. This is not going into the system yet, because once it's in the system, it's real for everyone. He knocked. He came in. He didn't say you should look at this. He didn't say anything at all. He set the page down on Eleanor's desk, in front of her coffee, and he waited. Eleanor read it. It was one line that mattered, from the Public Patent Registry, and it named an owner, and the owner was not Hale Dynamics. The owner was a person. The person was me. "Daniel," she said without looking up, "is this a problem?" "Yes." One word. Reyes didn't build a cushion around it. He'd spent the ride up in the elevator deciding not to, because he was the kind of operator who understood that a soft yes is a lie you tell to buy 48 hours you can't afford. Eleanor kept her eyes on the page a moment longer. Then she reached for her phone, and Reyes watched her do the thing he'd hoped she wouldn't. She didn't call legal, she didn't call finance, she called Ethan. "It's fixable," Ethan said before she'd finished the sentence. "How?" "I'm already on it." "Don't spiral on me. This is a licensing thing. Licensing things get renegotiated. That's literally what they're for." "He owns them, Ethan, outright. It's not a license to us anymore." "Which is a negotiating position, not a crisis. Trust me, I've unwound worse than this before breakfast." She said okay. She didn't believe him all the way, Reyes could see that, but okay was the less frightening of the two things she could say, and people reach for the less frightening thing the way a hand reaches for a railing. She set the phone down, she picked up her coffee, she took a sip and put it back down because it had gone cold while she was reading, and now the morning had that one extra small wrongness on top of the large one. The coffee she'd poured hot was cold, and nothing about the day would be the temperature she'd left it at. She pushed the cup to the edge of the desk. She did not put the printout away. It stayed there, face up, in front of the cold coffee, all morning. Reyes had seen a lot of executives receive a lot of bad numbers. He'd learned to read the tell in the first 10 seconds, whether they were doing math or doing denial. Eleanor was doing math. That was the part that unsettled him. She'd already run it. She knew, at the level below the level she was willing to speak from, exactly how bad the page was. And she'd called the one person in her life whose entire function was to tell her the math was wrong. He didn't say that. He was a COO, not a marriage counselor, and the two jobs only overlap in companies that are already dying. Reyes lingered at the door. Then he said the only other thing he said in that office. The delivery truck across the street is still there. Eleanor didn't ask what delivery truck. She looked at the printout. Down the hall, in the larger meeting room, Ethan was doing what Ethan does. He was standing while two lawyers sat, which tells you everything about how he ran a room. He treated altitude as an argument. It's a revocable license, he was saying. So we negotiate. Julian doesn't want to fight. He never wanted conflict. That was always the whole point of Julian. He goes quiet. He goes home. We reach out in a week. We make him whole on paper. Everybody moves on. The senior counsel had a folder open and hadn't looked up from it. The license revoked automatically, on termination. There's no negotiation trigger. The mechanism already fired. Then we create a trigger. We can't create something the contract doesn't contain. So we renegotiate the contract. The counsel finally looked up. Ethan, he's terminated. He isn't a party to any contract we're in a position to offer him. The second lawyer, younger, spoke for the first time. There may be a goodwill approach. If we reach him personally, before this becomes adversarial, sometimes people who leave clean will license back on reasonable terms just to avoid the hassle. But that window is narrow, and it closes the second he has a reason not to. He won't have a reason, Ethan said. Julian is the least dramatic man alive. Nobody in the room corrected him, which was its own kind of mistake, because the least dramatic man alive is exactly the one you should worry about, and every person at that table who'd actually worked with me knew it. They just weren't going to spend their morning arguing with the boyfriend. Ethan didn't answer the terminated party point. I've thought about that pose a lot since. The specific silence of a man who's just been handed a fact that doesn't fit his story, choosing to set it on the floor and step over it rather than pick it up. He didn't argue. He just changed the subject to the one he could win. What's the window on client notifications? Before transfer requests can be formally processed. 48 hours. Then that's the window. And then he left the room. And here is the part that mattered. The part that would cost them everything by part 5. There was, in fact, a play in those 48 hours. A real one. Get ahead of the client relationships. Call them first. Lock what could be locked. The counsel had just handed him the window and the reason to use it. Ethan used the window to reassure Eleanor. The client retention calls were never made. The warning went onto the record, in a lawyer's notes, dated, initialed, which is the kind of thing that stays buried right up until the day somebody goes looking for who knew what and when. He didn't fix the fixable thing. He talked over the man who was trying to. Meanwhile, across the street, I was sitting on a folding chair. My new office had 2 folding chairs, 1 borrowed table, and a coffee that a woman named Sarah Adewale had brought because she'd correctly guessed I hadn't set up anything as ambitious as a kettle. Sarah is the reason I wasn't scrambling. She's an investor with a long memory and a longer patience, and she'd committed the capital that put my name in light before Eleanor ever put it on a page. She didn't waste the morning on congratulations. She slid a piece of paper across the borrowed table and let it stop in front of me, face up, without a word of setup. It was a printed profile. Ethan Reed. His headline, in the confident sans serif of a man who paid for the premium account. Transformation catalyst, growth strategist, innovation architect. I read it for 3 seconds. Transformation catalyst. He'd actually typed that about himself and left it up. I had to assume the transformation in question was Hale Dynamics turning from a functioning company into a case study they'd assign in business school, and I had to admit he'd been enormously effective at that part. Is that a job? I asked. Sarah didn't look up from her coffee. Apparently. I set the printout down. That was the entire conversation about Ethan's credentials. She'd slid the page over to find out one thing, whether I already knew what he was. Told her I did. $300,000 a year of actual strategy infrastructure, replaced by a transformation catalyst. I'd have found it funnier if I hadn't watched it coming for 11 months, from a folding chair I didn't own yet, in a building I'd already signed the lease on. Committed or committed, I asked. She'd read me 3 names and 3 numbers off her own sheet, and in this business, the 2 phrases are different currencies. Committed means a man liked you at dinner. Committed means the wire clears on a date you can circle. Second one, Sarah said. The paperwork's done. You could have started taking calls yesterday. You did take a call yesterday. I took 3. She almost smiled. I know. 2 of them are on this table. She tapped the contract. The third one's deciding. He'll come. He doesn't like Ethan either, and he likes being lied to less than that. I nodded. There was a contract on the table, my first, from a client who'd called me, not the other way around, at 7:40 that morning. I signed it. No ceremony. Just the next thing. That's what life looks like when nobody's watching. A man in a folding chair signing a page, while 41 floors of glass across the street start to figure out the temperature of their own coffee. My phone buzzed. I read it. I didn't turn it towards Sarah. Send me your resume on Monday, I said to no one, typing it. Sarah glanced up. That's not a client text. No, it isn't. I set the phone face down on the table and went back to the contract, and Sarah, who is good at knowing when a subject has a lid on it, let it have its lid. The text was from Anya Sharma. Anya was 26, my junior analyst for 2 years, the kind of young that still believes if you work hard enough, the building will be fair to you. I called her back once Sarah had gone, and the office was just me and the folding chairs and the window. Julian. Her voice was steady, which was worse than crying. I don't know what's happening. Is it as bad as it looks? What does it look like from there? Like everything is about to fall apart. Nobody's saying anything, and that's how I know. She wasn't wrong, and I don't lie to people who aren't wrong. It's going to be fine, I said. For who? That one landed, because the honest answer was, for me, and for the clients smart enough to move, and eventually for her, but not on the timeline she needed. And I couldn't hand her a job I didn't have the capacity to fill yet. 90 days. I had a 90-day runway and 2 folding chairs. I couldn't absorb the whole sinking floor at once, no matter what my window looked like from her cubicle. Send me your resume on Monday, I said. Okay, a pause. Are you actually okay? I'm going to have a better answer for you on Monday. Monday, she repeated, like a person writing a single dry branch to hold on to. Okay, I can do Monday. Don't tell anyone you called me, I added. Not because it's a secret, because right now the smartest thing you own is that nobody thinks you're going anywhere. Keep it until you need it. You're already doing the thing, she said. The thing where you think 3 moves past the part I'm scared of. It's the only trick I have. She said okay again, quieter, and we hung up. It wasn't a rescue. It was a promise to consider one, from a man who didn't yet know if his own firm would be ready by Monday. I made it anyway. Some promises you make so the other person can sleep, and you carry the not knowing yourself. That's the part of this they never put in the revenge stories. I looked out the window. Hale Dynamics stood there in the sun, 41 floors of it, full of people like Anya who hadn't done anything except be standing on a floor when the people in charge decided to fire the man holding it up. I looked at it for about 5 seconds. Then I looked at the next thing on the table, the keys to my office, a single ring, still tagged from the locksmith. I picked them up. I put them in my pocket, where a set of keys is supposed to live, and I felt the small, stupid, specific weight of owning the room I was sitting in. Across the street, in an office I no longer had the badge for, a woman was looking at a cold cup of coffee and a printout with my name on it, telling herself it was irritation. It wasn't irritation. It just hadn't picked its real name yet. Part 3. I wasn't at the leadership meeting. I heard about it the way you hear about a car accident on your old street, secondhand, in detail, from people who couldn't stop describing it. For 11 years, Ethan's kind of meeting had worked. Not because of Ethan, there'd been no Ethan for most of those years, but because whoever stood at the whiteboard filling the room with energy had me sitting 3 seats down, quietly turning the energy into a plan by Friday. Performance up front, product in the back. That was the machine. Nobody in that company had ever watched the front of the machine run with the back of it missing. Now they were about to. Ethan called it a strategic alignment session. He booked the big conference room, not the boardroom, the working room, the one with whiteboards on 2 walls, and he put the whole leadership team around the table. The CFO, the head of operations, 2 VPs, Daniel Sanchez at one end, and Eleanor, who sat at the far end, not the head, which anyone who'd worked there could have told you was already a strange choice, because Eleanor sits at the head of every table she's allowed to. Ethan stood. He had markers. He was, by every account, in tremendous form. What Hale Dynamics needs right now is not incremental optimization, he said. That was Julian's world. Incremental, careful. We're past careful. We need architectural rethinking. He wrote a word on the board. Disruption. He drew a circle around it. We are going to stop thinking in the categories that got us here. Another word. Pivot. Another circle. Over the next 40 minutes, and everyone I talked to used that number, 40, like it was a wound, 2 more words joined them. Value creation. Ecosystem. He connected the 4 circles with arrows going both directions, so the whole thing looked like something you'd find on the wall of a company that was about to miss payroll. Then, off the cluster, 1 big arrow pointing at open space, and at the end of the arrow, 1 more word. Growth. That was the framework. 4 words and an arrow. The CFO, who was a serious person doing his best, asked the only real question in the room. What's that mean for the Q3 pipeline specifically? Timeline for stabilizing the client relationships? We don't think in quarters right now, Ethan said. We think in velocity. And the CFO, God help him, he was taking notes. They were all taking notes because they were professionals, and professionals write things down. The CFO wrote velocity on his pad, in quotation marks. Reyes told me about the quotation marks later, and I understood the whole meeting from the quotation marks. You put a word in quotes when you don't believe it, but you're not ready to say so. Reyes didn't write anything. He sat with his pad closed and his pen down, and he watched a 40-minute presentation resolve into 4 nouns. And somewhere around minute 35, Ethan stepped back from the board, looked at his own drawing with visible satisfaction, and delivered the line that finished him privately with everyone in that room. This is the architecture, Ethan said. Julian was operational, not architectural. That's the whole difference between us. Nobody answered. In a room full of talkers, nobody said a word. Silence, when it's the wrong length, is a sentence, and this silence went on exactly 1 beat too long. The length of 6 professionals independently deciding not to say the thing they were all thinking. And in that silence, Daniel Sanchez raised his phone. He didn't hide it, and he didn't wave it. He held it at the edge of the table, angled up at the whiteboard, and he took 1 photograph. Not an angry gesture, not a dramatic one. The gesture of a man who has just seen something he does not intend to forget and does not trust his memory to carry alone. He took the photo. He set the phone down. Ethan was still talking. He photographed it the way you photograph a receipt you'll need at tax time. That's the part that should have scared Ethan, if Ethan had been the kind of man who could read a room he wasn't performing to. Reyes wasn't documenting an outrage, he was documenting an asset for later. The head of operations tried, once, to make the framework land somewhere useful. So if I'm mapping this to the retention course, she said, which bucket does the client outreach live in, pivot or value creation? Both, Ethan said. That's the point. It's non-linear. She nodded slowly and wrote nothing, because there is no node you can take on the word both when the word both is being used to avoid picking one. And that, more than the whiteboard, was the thing Reyes carried out of the room. A senior operator had asked which lever to pull, and the man with the markers had answered by admiring the shape of the machine. Eleanor caught Reyes in the hallway afterward. Good session, she said. She said it the way you say a thing to see if saying it makes it true. Interesting session, Reyes said. Interesting. From your COO, about your boyfriend's first solo turn at the wheel, interesting is not a review. It's a diagnosis wearing a coat. Eleanor heard it. She said, yes, and she went to her office, and she did not ask anyone for the meeting notes because some part of her had already decided she didn't want to read them. Ethan left the meeting believing it had gone well. Everyone else left believing something too, and it wasn't that. The whiteboard stayed up. Reyes was the last one out, and he did not erase it. He closed the door on it, 4 words and an arrow, and he left it there, where it would be visible through the glass partition to anyone walking the executive floor, including Eleanor. The next morning, and the morning after that. 2 days later, Ethan came to Eleanor's office, and he was smoother than usual, which with Ethan was always the tell. Smooth was what he did when he was reaching for something. The team needs clear structural authority to function through the transition, he said. He'd sat down without being asked. Right now they're operating in ambiguity. That's expensive. I think it's time we gave them institutional clarity. Meaning what? Eleanor said. Meaning I should be formally titled Chief Strategy Advisor, something the org chart can point to. Right now I'm advising with no line of authority and the team feels that. It reads as improvisation. What we need is institutional clarity. Institutional clarity. He used phrases the way other men use cufflinks, not to hold anything together, just to be seen wearing them. Eleanor was quiet a moment. Behind Ethan, through the glass wall of her office, the conference room was visible, and on its far wall, still up, still uncleaned, 4 words and an arrow. The board would have to sign off on any executive title, she said. Then let's get them to sign off. I'll prepare the credential documentation. Make it clean, make it fast. Ethan, she looked at him. Is now the right time for a title process, given everything? It was the first time she'd pushed back on him about any of it. One sentence. A door opened 1 inch. Especially given everything, Ethan said, and he smiled, and he closed the inch. Uncertainty is what's killing us. A title creates confidence. People follow a title, not a mood. The team doesn't need me to be right every time. They need to know who's holding the wheel. That's what a title is. It's a hand on the wheel that everyone can see. It was a good line. Ethan always had good lines. That was the whole tragedy of him. He could describe leadership beautifully, in the confident, frictionless way of a man who had watched a great deal of it and performed none. And Eleanor had spent enough years around the real thing that she should have heard the difference. On a normal day she would have, but she was tired, and the patents were bleeding, and Ethan was the one person still telling her the bleeding would stop. And Eleanor, who could gut a board deck from memory, who circled the word synergy in red for 20 years, looked past him one more time at the whiteboard through the glass. The 4 words, the arrow. She looked at the thing he'd made, and then she looked back at the man who made it, and she said, "Okay." Half a second before it, that's all the pause was. Half a second where her instinct stood up and then sat back down. But it stood up, that was new. She reached for the phone to call the board chair. Ethan said, "I'll handle the paperwork." And she stopped, hand on the receiver, and let him. She made a fresh coffee after he left and drank it looking at the whiteboard through the glass, and it was cold before she finished it, because the coffee in that building had apparently decided to be cold now, permanently, as a policy. I got the whiteboard about an hour after the meeting. By then my office had furniture, an actual desk, my first real one, delivered that morning and still smelling like the warehouse. I was at it, reading a contract, when my phone lit with a Slack notification. Someone on the Hale Dynamics leadership team had forwarded the photo into a private channel, a channel that existed, I noted, and that Ethan wasn't in. That was the real news, not the whiteboard, the channel. A private channel is how a company starts telling the truth to itself when it can't tell the truth out loud yet. People who've stopped trusting the meeting build a second, quieter meeting, and the second one is where the real decisions eventually get made. Ethan had run a company for 2 weeks and already produced a room that met without him. He'd have been prouder of that than of anything if he'd known it existed, right up until he understood what it meant. I opened the image. I turned the phone sideways to look at the arrow he'd drawn between disruption and value creation. He drew an arrow between disruption and value creation. I have spent 11 years studying how strategic systems compound. In that time, I built 3 patent portfolios, moved 15 client relationships worth 8 figures, and once kept the company from lighting $17 million on fire with a 40-page memo I wrote on a Sunday nobody asked me to work. Ethan Reed drew an arrow. I had to assume the arrow was doing a great deal of work. Strategically speaking, I think the arrow was the whole plan. I set the phone face down. I signed the next page of the contract. Sarah called while I was signing. "Ethan asked for a formal title today," she said. "Chief Strategy Advisor." "How did you?" "It's the only title that gives him what he wants without giving him a board seat. He's not stupid about what he's reaching for, just about what it costs." She said yes. I let the pen rest a second. Not surprise, just the small quiet of a thing sliding into the slot you built for it 3 months ago. "He's going to need to credential the title," I said. "I know." There was nothing to add to that. Sarah had shown me the LinkedIn page in part 2, Transformation Catalyst, Growth Strategist, Innovation Architect, a headline written by a man who'd never had anyone check. A title on an org chart is a headline someone checks. The board would need documentation. Documentation is the one thing Ethan had spent his whole career avoiding, because documentation is where the difference between what you say and what you are goes to get measured. 3 weeks, I said. 2.5, said Sarah, and hung up, because she doesn't cheerlead, she calculates, and she'd already run the same math I had and shaved 3 days off it out of professional respect for the speed of Ethan's own ambition. I signed the last page. I put the contract in a folder, a real folder, in a real drawer, in a desk I owned. Then I looked out the window at the building across the street, where the conference room light was on, and very faintly through 2 panes of glass and 40 feet of April air, you could just make out a smear of whiteboard color that a serious company would have erased 2 days ago. I didn't say anything about it. I opened the next file. Some things you don't have to push. You just have to have signed the lease early, kept your name on your own work, and be sitting at your own desk when the arrow finishes doing all that work. Part 4. There's a specific kind of bad decision that doesn't look like a decision at all. It looks like a signature. Ethan brought the credential submission to Eleanor's office himself. 1 page, a formal cover letter to the board, requesting they ratify his Chief Strategy Advisor title and confirm the credentials in the attached packet. He set it in front of her with a pen already uncapped, which is a small thing, but you don't hand a person an open pen unless you'd rather they didn't stop to think about the cap. Standard board procedure, he said. Ratification, credential confirmation. I've been through it at 2 previous firms. It's a formality. The board wants paperwork. We give them paperwork. Eleanor read the cover letter. Then she said his name, the way you say a name when it isn't a question and isn't quite an accusation, when it's just a hand set flat on a table between 2 people. Ethan. It's clean, he said. You can read the packet if you want. And there it was, the whole hinge of the thing, offered and declined in the same breath. He said, you can read the packet if you want, and she didn't want, because reading the packet would have meant admitting she hadn't already read it, and admitting that would have meant admitting that a great deal had been signed lately that she hadn't read. So she didn't ask for the packet. Behind Ethan, through the glass wall of her office, the conference room whiteboard was still up, 2 days now, 4 words, 1 arrow, untouched. She looked at it. She looked back at the cover letter. Her hand picked up the pen, and she held it there, above the signature line, for 1 full second. 1 second is nothing. 1 second is the time it takes a good executive to catch a bad number in a deck. Some part of her caught something. The pen hovered, and her instinct stood up in its chair the way it had 2 days before, and this time nobody even had to talk it back down. She just lowered the pen and signed, because the alternative to signing was a conversation she had decided, somewhere below the level she'd admit to, that she was not going to have. Ethan took the page. He was almost at the door when she stopped him. Ethan, the whiteboard in the conference room. Has anyone erased it? It's still in use. It's been 2 days. We're still building on the framework. And he left. Still in use. The whiteboard was in use the way a stopped clock is in use, technically present, correct by pure accident twice a day, and telling no one the time. Eleanor looked at it through the glass for a while. Then she picked up her phone and read the email she'd been not reading for an hour. Client number 1. A short, courteous note, changing their primary contact to Julian Thorne Advisors, effective immediately. Regards. She set the phone face down on the desk. She'd started doing that. It was becoming a habit, the small mercy of turning a screen over so the thing on it couldn't look back at you. Ethan went to his own desk and built the packet, and I want to be fair to him, he was not sloppy about it. He'd done this before, in smaller ponds, and he knew the trick was never the big lie, it was the small, unverifiable ones stacked neatly. 7 positions listed, 4 of them fictional in some load-bearing detail, a title inflated here, a date stretched there, a firm that had technically existed listed as though he'd technically run it. He was careful. He was methodical. He was, in his own frame, doing excellent work. He had survived this level of scrutiny before. He kept telling himself that. He had. The problem with surviving a thing in a smaller pond is that it teaches you the water is shallow everywhere. Here is the part I keep coming back to, the part that isn't about Ethan at all. Ethan lied. That's just weather. That's what Ethan is. Eleanor signed. A board submission carries the signature of the person who put it forward, and she put it forward, on her letterhead, with her name, into a body whose entire function is to verify the things people put in front of it. She didn't fabricate anything. She did something quieter and, in the long run, more expensive. She vouched for a packet she refused to read. In a company, that's not a small sin. That's the whole job, done backward. The board doesn't hire a verifier because they distrust you. They hire one because trust, at that level, is a thing you're supposed to be able to check. She knew that better than anyone alive. She'd built a company on it. And she signed anyway, and turned her phone face down, and told herself the review would be collegial. I got the lawsuit the next morning. 1 page, formal letterhead, my name in the header, courier to my office because Ethan's lawyers apparently believed a physical document lands harder than an email. It doesn't, but I appreciated the gesture. I read it over coffee. It alleged that I had misappropriated trade secrets, proprietary methodologies, client relationships, and intellectual property developed during employment at Hale Dynamics. Paragraph 3 named the patents, by number, in a public legal filing. I set the page down. I looked out the window at the building across the street, 41 floors of glass with a woman somewhere inside it turning her phone face down, and I let myself enjoy exactly one thought all the way through. He sued me for stealing trade secrets. The trade secrets in question were my patents, which I owned, which he had just, in a legal document with his lawyers' names on it, confirmed I owned, by naming them as intellectual property developed during employment, when the entire fight, the only fight, was that they were intellectual property I had registered personally and kept in my own name for exactly this morning. Ethan Reed, Disruption Catalyst. He'd finally disrupted something. He disrupted his own legal strategy before the first hearing. I called Sarah. "It's live," she said. "It's live. What do you want to do? What does your first page say?" She read it off her own copy, the same paragraph, the same named patents. Then quiet on the line, the specific quiet of two people arriving at the same conclusion from opposite ends of a phone. "He named the patents in a legal filing," I said. "He named the patents in a legal filing," she said back, and neither of us laughed, because it was past funny and into the flat, clean territory where a thing is simply true. "File the counter. What do you want in it? Everything that belongs in it. The credential submission?" I thought about that for the length of a breath. Not whether was obvious, just whether it was time. If it fits, it fits. Okay. That was the entire conversation. I'm not going to walk you through what the counterfiling does or how, because the machinery is a lawyer's business and the result is the only part that matters, and the result was this. The moment Ethan filed a lawsuit that named my patents, he made my ownership of them a matter of public legal record, and he handed us the one document we would need to put his own credential submission into the record right beside it. He'd been trying to bury the patents. He took out a full-page ad about them instead and signed it. Before I put on the coat, though, the lawsuit did cost me one uncomfortable hour, and I'll be honest about it, because the revenge stories never are. My newest client called before I'd finished the coffee. He'd already heard, bad news travels through an industry faster than good paper, and he was nervous, and nervous clients are the only real threat a 90-day-old firm has. "I saw the filing," he said. "Should I be worried?" I moved my account to a man who's being sued for stealing the thing I'm paying him for. "Read paragraph 3, I said. "Then read it to your own lawyer. Then call me back." "That's it?" "That's it. I'm not going to argue with you this morning. I'm going to let the document Ethan filed argue with you for me. It's more persuasive than I am, and it was written by his side." He called back 40 minutes later, and his voice had changed, and he did not cancel. That was the whole cost of the lawsuit to me. One nervous hour and one phone call, paid, cleared, done. That's what it looks like when the enemy's own weapon does your closing for you. I put the lawsuit page face down on the desk next to the coffee. I got my coat. I had a client lunch, and I was not going to be late to it, and I was not going to spend the walk over there watching a stock ticker, because a man who watches the ticker has started to believe the ticker is doing the work, and the ticker was not doing the work. Ethan was doing the work. I just had to keep my lunch reservations. That night, Ethan took Eleanor to dinner to celebrate. I heard about this later, the way I heard about all of it, through the quiet grapevine that now ran out of that building through people who'd stopped trusting the meeting. But the picture came through clearly enough. An expensive place. Wine. Ethan expansive in the chair, the way he got when he believed the world was finally agreeing with him. He raised his glass. "To new chapters," he said, "and to Hale Dynamics next decade." Eleanor touched her glass to his and drank. She did not say "to new chapters." She didn't say anything. She drank, and then she asked a question, which is what she does now instead of agreeing. "How long does a credential review take?" 3 weeks, usually, but I know the board chair. It'll be collegial. "And the lawsuit?" "Intimidates. That's the whole job of a lawsuit like this. Julian's firm is what, 90 days old? He can't sustain a real legal fight. He settles, he goes quiet, he goes away." "He didn't fight when I fired him either," Eleanor said. "It wasn't agreement." She was turning the fact over, holding it up to a different light than the one Ethan was standing in. A man who doesn't fight when you take everything is either broken or finished on his own terms, and only one of those two men opens an office across the street the next morning. "Exactly," Ethan said, hearing only the half he wanted. "It's who he is, conflict-averse. It's why this works." She didn't correct him. She was learning that correcting Ethan cost more than letting him be wrong, and that the interest on letting him be wrong was, at least, being paid by someone other than her, for now. Eleanor nodded and picked up the menu and ordered the soup, not because she wanted the soup, because the soup was the simplest thing on the page, and choosing was one more thing she didn't have the appetite for. Ethan ordered the most expensive thing on the menu without once looking at the right-hand column and refilled his own glass, and hers sat there in front of her, still nearly full, while his emptied at the seed of a man toasting a victory only he could see. "You know what I think the real difference is," Ethan said, "between Julian and someone like me?" Tell me. Julian was always very good at managing existing assets. I'm good at creating new ones. Eleanor said, and looked at her soup. He told her he creates assets. Let me tell you what Ethan Reed had created that week. One credential packet with 4 fabricated positions in it, one lawsuit that legally confirmed I owned everything he claimed I'd stolen, and a whiteboard. I would not personally characterize any of those as assets. But I wasn't at the dinner. I was at my lunch, laughing at something a client said, on the far side of a street, at a table where the wine was ordinary and everyone at it was in the same story. Eleanor set her glass down, still mostly full. Her phone lit once, face up on the white tablecloth before she could stop it, and she saw the name before she turned it over. Client number 2. She turned the screen down. We should go, she said. The dessert menu, tomorrow, we should go. She was already in a different story than the one Ethan was telling. She just hadn't told him yet, because she hadn't finished admitting it to herself, and Ethan was still refilling his glass, toasting a new chapter in a book he had not read the ending of. The ending he had, in fact, written himself in a legal filing, in paragraph 3, by number. Part 5. A building doesn't fall all at once, it loses floors. And if you're standing in the right room, you can watch it happen in real time, one phone at a time, 90 seconds apart. The emergency leadership call was already an emergency before the letter started. The stock had opened soft, the lawsuit had made the news, and the news had done what news does, and the number on the screen in the corner of the boardroom, the ticker that runs all day whether anyone's watching or not, had been sliding since the bell. Ethan was standing at the head of the table presenting on the very lawsuit that was doing the sliding. The lawsuit forces a settlement timeline, he was saying, which gives us a controlled runway to... The CFO's phone lit up on the table. He turned it over out of reflex, glanced, and then didn't look away, which is a different thing than glancing. He read it twice. Then he said, in the flat voice of a man reading a weather report he doesn't believe, "We have a client transfer request." "Noted," Ethan said. "We'll handle it after the call." "It's after the call." And Ethan kept going, because to Ethan an interruption was just a headwind, and headwinds were what he was for. 90 seconds later, the head of operations phone lit up. She read it. She didn't say anything at all. She looked across the table at the CFO, and the CFO looked back at her, and the two of them held the whole conversation in that look, without a single word crossing the table, and the conversation was, "Yours too? Mine too." She set the phone down face up, which was its own small announcement, because she was a woman who kept her phone in her bag during meetings, always had, and now it was on the table with the screen up like something she needed witnesses for. "Ethan," she said. One word, not a question, a flag planted. "I hear you," Ethan said, not hearing her. "I want to finish the through line first." He did not get to finish the through line, because 90 seconds after that, Daniel Sanchez's phone lit up, and Reyes did the thing that ended the meeting without ending it. He read the letter. Then he picked up the phone, and instead of turning it over, he stood it upright on its little edge in the middle of the table, screen out, angled so that the woman at the far end could see the sender's name for herself. It was the largest client relationship the company had, the anchor. The name that was in the pitch deck, the name the analyst asked about, the name that had been on the books since the leaky radiator days. Eleanor read it from across the table. Then she turned her head, maybe 15 degrees, and she looked at the ticker on the screen in the corner. The ticker said negative 22%, and she did not look away from it, not for a long time. 3 letters, not 1 and not 5. 3, arriving 90 seconds apart on 3 different phones from 3 clients who did not share a lawyer or a golf club or a group chat as far as anyone knew. People think coordination looks like a conspiracy. It doesn't. It looks like this. 3 separate people in 3 separate offices, each reading the same morning's news, each remembering the same quiet hallway sentence from the same man, each deciding independently that today was the day, and the arithmetic of independent decisions landing in the same hour is far more damning than any plot, because you can fight a plot. You cannot fight the fact that everyone who knew you left the same week for the same reason without being asked. The CFO had his letter open in front of him. The head of operations had hers. Reyes's phone stood on its edge in the middle of the table like a small tombstone. Same message, 3 ways. Effective immediately, primary relationship transferring to Julian Thorne advisors with thanks for the years of partnership. The thanks were the part that would keep Eleanor up. People don't thank you on the way out unless they mean it, and meaning it is worse. I've been in a lot of rooms with Eleanor Vance, and I want to be precise about what happened next, because it is the single most important thing that happened in that building the whole year, and it was nothing. She didn't gasp, she didn't stand, she didn't reach for a phone. She looked at the number, negative 22%, and she stopped speaking, and the stopping went on. 90 seconds is a long time. Count it sometime, in a silent room, with people watching you. 90 seconds is long enough for everyone at the table to understand that the person at the head of it has left the conversation and gone somewhere private with a number. Ethan filled it, because Ethan cannot let a silence stand. A silence, to Ethan, is just a room waiting to be told what to feel. The market is responding to headlines, he said, not fundamentals. This is sentiment. Sentiment corrects. What we're watching is noise, and noise is loud, but noise is not the signal, and we do not manage to the noise. What is the client stabilization plan? Eleanor said. She said it without looking at him. She said it to the ticker. I've outlined the approach. Velocity across multiple fronts, re-anchoring the relationships that Julian personally, specifically. Now she looked at him. What is the plan, specifically? It was the first time in months she had interrupted Ethan Reed, and everyone in the room heard the hinge in it, the sound of something turning that had been rusted in one position for a long time. Ethan heard it too. And here is the tell, the thing that finished him privately with every professional at that table. He answered a specific question with a slogan. The plan is discipline, he said. The plan is not to panic. Nobody wrote that down. That was Ethan's whole tragedy in one sentence. Asked for the plan, twice, specifically, in the middle of a 22% morning, he reached for discipline and don't panic, which are the two things you say when you do not have a plan and have never had one and have been, this entire time, a very confident man standing in front of a whiteboard with an arrow on it. He should have stopped there. He didn't. He gave the speech. I wasn't in the room for it, but I've heard it reconstructed by 3 separate people, and the remarkable thing is that they all remembered it as impressive. That's the part you have to understand about Ethan. The speech was good. It had energy and shape and a couple of genuinely quotable lines. He talked about velocity, he talked about architecture. He said the sentence that would follow him out of that company. The market overreacted. What we're seeing is a sentiment correction, not a structural indictment. Then he made the mistake underneath the mistake. And let's be honest about the 3 clients, he said. 3 clients is not a trend. It's a personal loyalty dynamic. Julian cultivated relationships, fine, that was his skill. But loyalty to a person is fragile. We build loyalty to the institution. We cultivate new relationships. That's the difference between what he did and what we're going to do. He was standing in front of a screen that said negative 22%, telling a room full of people who had just watched 15 years of client relationships walk out the door in 90-second increments that client relationships didn't matter. He was disproving his own thesis while he spoke it. The evidence was on the screen behind his head, in red, and he was gesturing in front of it like a weatherman who hadn't turned around. The leadership team gave him nothing. Not because they were cruel, because they were done, privately, each of them. And professional people who are privately done don't argue, they get polite. Polite is the sound a company makes when it has stopped believing you. We hear you, Ethan, the CFO said. We're monitoring the situation, said the head of operations. Thank you for the context, someone added. And context is what you thank a man for when you have decided his words are no longer information, only atmosphere. If you have never watched a room go polite on someone, it's a strange thing to witness, because nothing visibly happens. No one raises a voice, no one rolls an eye. The temperature just drops a single degree and stays there, and every sentence gets a little shorter, and the questions stop. That's the real tell. The questions stop. Because a room only asks questions of a person it still believes can answer them. Nobody in that boardroom asked Ethan anything after the number came up. They thanked him. You thank the speaker at the end. You don't thank the pilot mid-flight unless you've quietly concluded he isn't flying the plane. The CFO, later, would be the one who mattered most in this, though nobody knew it in the room. He'd written velocity in quotation marks 2 weeks earlier. Now he wrote nothing at all, and he was the man the board would call first when they wanted to know what the leadership team actually thought, as opposed to what the leadership team said in front of Ethan. There's always a gap between those two things in a dying company. The size of the gap is the company's real balance sheet. And through all of it, Daniel Sanchez said nothing at all. He sat with his phone in his hand, and he wasn't reading email, and he wasn't watching Ethan. He was looking at a photograph on his screen, one he'd taken 2 weeks earlier, under the edge of a different table, of a whiteboard with 4 words and an arrow. He was checking his notes. He was confirming, against the man performing in front of him, that the picture matched the pattern. It did. Ethan turned, at the end, to Eleanor directly, the way he always did when the room went cold. He'd learned that warming her back up was enough, that if she was with him the room's temperature didn't matter. Eleanor, you've come through worse than this. The market doesn't know what you know. We stay the course. The course being, she said, velocity, new relationships, institutional clarity, what we discussed. She looked at him for a moment, then she said, okay, and she was quoting him. She'd started doing that, taking his words and setting them down in front of herself like foreign coins, turning them over, trying to decide if any of them would spend. Velocity, institutional clarity. She said, okay, the way you read back a script, you don't have the heart to tell the writer isn't working yet. Thank you, Ethan, she said, and the meeting was, in every way that mattered, over, though it would take the org chart another 3 weeks to notice. Across the street, I was eating a sandwich. Ham, good bread, the kind of sandwich you get from the one deli in a neighborhood that takes sandwiches personally. I was at my desk with a client file open and the sandwich half gone when my assistant knocked and put her head in. The Hale Dynamics boardroom is visible through our window right now, she said, if you want to see it. I looked up. She wasn't wrong. My back window looked straight across Fenwick Street into their boardroom, and their boardroom was lit up and full and clearly visibly wrong. People standing who should have been sitting, 2 of them on phones, one arm extended toward the screen in the corner, and at the head of the table a familiar figure, still up, still talking, gesturing at a room that had stopped throwing anything back. I looked at it for about 3 seconds. Then I looked back at my sandwich. The situation I could see was developing. I'd estimated the timeline for something like this within about 4 days, and it was arriving essentially on schedule, and there was nothing productive I could do about it from across the street that had not already been done 3 months ago, when I signed the lease, or 2 weeks before the firing, when I told a handful of people I trusted to stay in touch. Also, it was a genuinely excellent sandwich. It was the kind of sandwich that quietly suggests the important decisions in life are actually very simple, which is not the reputation sandwiches generally enjoy, but in my experience they've earned it and rarely get the credit. I took another bite. My assistant closed the door. Sarah stopped by a few minutes later, on her way to somewhere with better parking. She stood at my window and looked across the street the way you look at a fire that isn't yours. 3 letters, she said. Same morning. Did you ask them to... I told them to stay in touch. I set the sandwich down. 2 weeks before she fired me. In a hallway. It's the kind of thing you say to people you respect. Stay in touch. It doesn't mean anything until it means everything. And they did. And they did. She kept looking out the window. The ticker's at -22. I know. You're not going to, she gestured vaguely at the whole burning building across the street. What would I go over there and do? She thought about that honestly, the way Sarah thinks about everything, turning it for the flaw and not finding one. Fair point, she said, and she left, because she had a meeting and I had a sandwich, and neither of us had anything to add to a number that was doing all its own talking. I want to be clear about one thing, because the version of this story where I'm eating a sandwich while my enemy burns is a satisfying version, and it is not quite the true one. I didn't burn anything. I couldn't have if I'd wanted to. 3 clients I never called wrote 3 letters I never asked for on a morning I spent at my desk because a company decided to fire the man who'd earned those relationships and then went on television, legally, in paragraph 3, in a whiteboard, in a speech, announcing that the relationships had never been real. The market is the most honest character in this whole story. It has no feelings and no side. It looked at all of it and said, in red, -22%, and it was not wrong, and it was not mine. My assistant opened the door one more time and said a name, a 4th client, a good one, calling now, today, wanting in. Send them in, I said. I folded the sandwich wrapper closed. I could still fit 1 more this quarter, maybe 2. The runway was the runway, and 90 days was 90 days, and the hardest part of this whole stretch, if you want the truth, was the people I couldn't take yet. Not the ones across the street I wouldn't miss. I picked up the next file. Behind me, through 2 panes of glass and 40 feet of April, the boardroom lights stayed on and the ticker stayed red. I didn't look at it. It wasn't going anywhere, and neither, for once, was I. Part 6. The lawsuit went public the way these things do now. 1 news alert, a single line on 100,000 phones, and then a company that had been having a private bad month was having it in front of everyone. Ethan's answer to that was a statement. He wrote it himself. He rewrote it 4 times, which he mentioned, because to Ethan the number of drafts was evidence of quality rather than of trouble. He brought the final version to Eleanor's office and read it to her aloud with the quiet pride of a man reading you his own poetry. We remain confident in our strategic direction and the synergy of our leadership team, he read, and we will continue to pursue value creation for our shareholders through this transition period. He said synergy and did not flinch. Eleanor read it back silently to herself, and if she noticed the word, she didn't say so. She had stopped correcting his vocabulary somewhere back around the whiteboard. It was easier to let it stand. Letting it stand was becoming her entire management philosophy, and it was about to cost her a sentence in front of cameras. The key, Ethan told her, is that we don't apologize and we don't explain. We project stability, Confidence is contagious. You go out there like nothing is wrong, and then nothing is wrong. That's how markets actually work. It's psychology. There's a lawsuit, Ethan. There's a narrative. The lawsuit is one input into the narrative. We controlled the narrative. He tapped the page. Read it the way you'd read an earnings beat. Chin up, like you're doing them a favor by being there. She'd built a company from a floor with a leaking radiator. Nobody in the world needed to teach Eleanor Vance how to walk into a hostile room. But she took the coaching, and she took the page, and she didn't tell him that the surest sign a person doesn't understand a crisis is that they think it can be managed with posture. She delivered it at a podium in the lobby, reporters in a loose half circle, Ethan just off to the side where you couldn't quite see him unless you were looking, which I later learned several people were. His lips moved slightly with hers. He was mouthing his own words back at her like a stage mother in the wings. The statement itself was fine. Controlled, rehearsed, boardroom precise, Eleanor could read a hostile room in her sleep. The problem was never going to be the statement. The problem was the question, and Ethan had written a statement for a room that accepts your framing and forgotten that a press room is full of people paid specifically to check it. A reporter raised a hand. Can you clarify whether the patent reversion was anticipated in Hale Dynamics' risk management framework? There it was, the one question, the only question really, and the one Ethan had not written her an answer to, because writing an answer to it would have meant admitting to himself that it would be asked. Eleanor paused. 1 full second. On camera. Her hand, resting on the edge of the podium, tightened. You could see the knuckles change, a small thing, the kind of thing a camera loves and a person can't take back. 1 second of silence from a CEO who does not do silence in answer to a specific question is not nothing. It's an answer. Everyone in that lobby who knew how to listen heard it before she said a word. The situation is being addressed through appropriate channels, she said. Technically, that commits to nothing. Practically, to every industry lawyer and board-adjacent professional watching the feed, it confirmed the one thing Ethan had spent 3 weeks trying to bury. The reversion was not anticipated. It was discovered. You don't route an anticipated event through appropriate channels. You route a surprise through appropriate channels. The reporter heard it exactly that way. So it was a discovery, he said, pen already moving, not a planned transition? Thank you all for your time, Eleanor said, and she stepped back off the podium and was gone before Ethan could catch her eye and give her whatever signal he'd prepared, because she wasn't looking for his signal anymore. She didn't stop to debrief. She walked straight through the lobby to the car, and Ethan followed, and she didn't look at him until the door was closed, and it was just the two of them and the driver pretending to be furniture. We need to be more careful, she said. It went fine. You were poised. The synergy line landed. She turned and looked at him then, really looked. The way you look at a word you've read 100 times and suddenly aren't sure is spelled right. The synergy line. He'd written the word twice into one paragraph and he thought it had landed. And for the first time, she let herself hold the question all the way instead of setting it down. What if he isn't managing this badly? What if this is simply the ceiling of what he can do and I put him in charge of the thing I built? It didn't land, she said quietly. A reporter just asked me on camera whether we saw the patent problem coming, and I couldn't say yes. Because legal told you not to. No, Ethan. She looked back out the window. Because we didn't. He started to say something about optics and she let it wash over her without answering, the way you let a radio play in another room. Not answering Ethan had become her second management philosophy, and between the two of them, letting his words stand and declining to fight them, she'd built a small, quiet policy of surrender that she still, at that point, believed was patience. It wasn't patience. Patience is a plan with a clock on it. This was just the sound of someone deciding, one unfought sentence at a time, to keep being wrong on purpose because the alternative was a conversation about who she'd become. I heard about the podium during a client dinner. I'd stepped out to take Sarah's call between courses. She doesn't call during dinners unless it's worth the interruption, and this, she decided, was. She said synergy twice, Sarah said. In the same statement? Second paragraph. 2 sentences apart. I stood in the little corridor outside the dining room and let that sit for a second. Ethan wrote that. Obviously. In the same paragraph. 2 sentences apart, Sarah said again, patiently, because she understood I wasn't confirming the fact, I was mourning it. I want to be honest about what I felt because it wasn't triumph. It was something quieter and more embarrassing. Ethan Reed writes synergy without noticing. He also uses leverage as a verb and says ecosystem when he means the people currently in the room. I spent 12 years building something real inside a company, and the public face of that something was now the word synergy, said twice, 2 sentences apart, by a woman reading a man's 4th draft. I felt a specific useless grief, not for the company, which was no longer mine to grieve, but for the 12 years, which were. Then I went back to the dinner. My client was mid-story, something about a contract negotiation in Singapore that had gone sideways over a mistranslated clause and a seating arrangement. I caught up on the third sentence and laughed at the right moment, and he didn't notice I'd been anywhere. I consider that a professional skill that does not get enough recognition. That's the thing the revenge version of this story always leaves out. I wasn't across the street with a monitor and a spreadsheet, watching their stock and rubbing my hands. I was having dinner with a man who trusted me with his company's money, listening to a genuinely good story about Singapore, ordering the fish, being, for 2 hours, a person and not a strategy. The best thing you can do to someone who fired you is build a life so full that their collapse becomes a phone call you take in a hallway between courses. I didn't win by watching Ethan. I won by having somewhere better to be while he lost. Later, after the dinner, I went back to the office. It was dark by then, my assistant gone, one desk lamp, the Hale Dynamics building across the street unlit for the night. My lawyer had a last item, relayed through Sarah, about the counter filing. We'd already made the decision weeks ago, the counter goes in, and it references what Ethan's own lawsuit made available. This call was just the shape of it and the timing. The counter can reference Ethan's credential submission, Sarah said, reading from the lawyer, as context for the hostile environment framing his lawsuit implies. It's a corporate document now. It's discoverable. Does it need to be in the counter? It gives the counter standing to answer the story his suit is telling. Then he goes in. When does he file? Tomorrow morning. Okay. That was the whole call. I'm not going to walk you through the legal shape of it, because the shape is a lawyer's craft, and the outcome is the only part that matters. And the outcome was almost too neat to say out loud. Ethan filed a lawsuit. The lawsuit required a counter. The counter referenced his credential submission, the one he'd volunteered, to a board, to get a title he didn't need. He had, entirely by himself, in 3 weeks, built a legal document that pointed at a corporate document that documented his own fraud. I have sat in rooms where strategies half this elegant were planned over months, by teams, with whiteboards that actually had plans on them. Ethan managed it without trying, and without knowing he'd done it, which is the only way a thing this clean ever gets built, by a man who thinks he's doing something else. People assume revenge is an act, a thing you do, with timing and a flourish, at the moment of maximum witness. It isn't, or the good kind isn't. The good kind is a structure. You put the load-bearing pieces in place quietly, years early, your name on the patents, a private founding agreement in a drawer, a lease signed in the cold season, and then you simply decline to be the one who removes the pin. You let the other man reach for it himself, because a man who is sure he's winning always reaches. Ethan reached for a title he didn't need, which required a packet, which invited a verifier, which produced a counter, which named the packet. Every link his. I just kept my hands in my pockets and my dinner reservations, and let a man in a hurry build the machine that would, on its own schedule, with no help from me, arrive at the truth. I closed the laptop. I turned off the desk lamp. I picked up my coat and looked once across the street at the dark tower. And then I locked my own door under my own lit sign and walked home. And I slept. The way I've slept every night since the Tuesday she read me off a page. Ethan found out about the verifier the next day. He'd been treating the credential review as a formality, a favor essentially, from a board chair he golfed with. A bit of paper the board wanted so they could say they'd done their diligence. Then his contact on the board told him the rest of it. The board's bringing in an outside firm to run the credential check, the contact said. Who authorized the outside hire? The chair did. Is that standard? For the scope of the submission, an executive title, 7 cited positions, yeah, it's standard. Full check on all 7. And Ethan was quiet for exactly 1 second. I wasn't there for it, but I'd bet the year's revenue I know what that second looked like, because I'd watched Eleanor have her 1 second at the podium, and it was the same second. The moment the scripted reality doesn't cover the next line, and there's nothing under it but the truth you've been outrunning. That's fine, Ethan said. Everything in the packet is accurate. Tell the chair I appreciate the thoroughness. It'll be good to have it formally confirmed. Good to have it formally confirmed. He actually said that, leaned into the review, welcomed it, the way you loudly volunteer for the thing you're most afraid of, so no one suspects you're afraid of it. His contact took it at face value and rang off, reassured. Ethan sat with the phone in his hand a moment longer than the call required. 1 second too fast and 1 word too certain, which is how you can always tell. A man reporting a fact says it flat. A man performing one says it quickly, before anyone can look at it too closely. Ethan said, everything in the packet is accurate, the way you say a thing you have suddenly, for the first time, begun to wonder about. 4 of the 7 were not accurate. He knew which 4. And somewhere in a building he'd never set foot in, an outside firm that had never golfed with anyone was opening a file with his name on it and starting, methodically, at position 1. Part 7. The whiteboard was finally gone. Someone had erased it. You could see the clean glass of the conference room from Eleanor's office now, the wall behind it blank and innocent, as though 4 words and an arrow had never presided over the worst month in the company's history. Ethan had cleaned up the one thing that was easy to clean. It's always the easy thing that gets cleaned first. The hard things don't wipe off with a felt eraser. Eleanor had set 2 chairs facing each other in her office instead of talking to Ethan across the desk. She'd chosen that. She wanted to be close enough to watch his face when she asked, because she had finally reached the point where she needed to watch his face. Ethan, before the board meeting, I need to ask you directly. She kept her voice level. Is everything in the credential packet accurate? Everything in that packet is accurate, and I stand behind it. He didn't pause. That was the thing. There was no gap between her question mark and his answer, not the natural half-second a person takes to actually consider a question, just the clean, instant delivery of a sentence that had been written and rehearsed and was waiting behind his teeth for exactly this moment. He held her eyes while he said it. Then he held them 2 seconds longer, which is what people do when they've decided that eye contact is the same thing as honesty. It isn't. Honesty doesn't need to prove it isn't lying. Only lying needs that. Eleanor watched him. And here is the whole part, the quiet hinge the entire back half of the story turns on. She saw it. Not consciously, not in words she'd have said out loud, but some old expensive instinct in her, the one that built a company, registered that the answer had come too fast and too smooth and too complete. The door to the truth stood open in front of her for about 3 seconds. She looked at it, and she closed it. Okay, she said. She had a follow-up ready, a small one. And the board meeting, do we know how long it runs? 2 hours maximum. It will go smoothly. I know the room. He was already shifting his weight forward to stand, the way you do when you've decided a conversation is over and you'd like the other person to agree. Okay, she said again. 2 okays in one conversation, and if you'd been in the room, you'd have heard that the second one weighed more than the first. The first okay closed the question. The second okay closed the door, and she knew, at the weight-bearing level where she didn't have to admit things yet, that she was closing it on purpose. Before he reached the door, he turned back, because Ethan could never leave a silence without decorating it. Don't worry about Thursday, he said. I've known the chair for years. These reviews are collegial. They want to confirm the story, not interrogate it. We give them the story, they nod, we move on. It's relationships, Eleanor. It's always relationships. That's the one thing I've always understood better than anyone in that building. And that was the sentence, if she'd been listening for it, it's always relationships, from the man whose entire month had been a demonstration that relationships were the exact thing he did not understand, that he'd mistaken being liked for being trusted, and access for authority, and a boardroom for a dinner party. He said it with total confidence and left, and Eleanor sat there and let the confidence hang in the room after him like a smell. She thought, not for the first time, about how she'd gotten here. Not the firing, she could still defend the firing to herself, in the language Ethan had given her, comfortable but replaceable, a man who was going to leave anyway. It was everything after. The signature she didn't read, the whiteboard she didn't erase, the question she'd just asked and then flinched away from the answer to. Each one small, each one a door she'd chosen to close rather than walk through, and she was starting to understand that a person doesn't collapse all at once either. She loses floors. One unwalked-through door at a time. Ethan left. Eleanor sat with her phone in her hand. She'd meant to call his contact on the board, get the pre-meeting temperature, the informal read, the thing any careful executive does before walking into a room. Her thumb was already moving toward the name. Her hand stopped. Mid-motion, a few inches above the screen, it just stopped. The way a hand stops when the person it belongs to realizes that making the call means learning something, and that she was not, this afternoon, in the market for anything else to learn. If she called, the contact might tell her about the outside verifier, about the scope. And then she would know, and knowing would require her to do something, and doing something would require admitting that she'd signed a cover letter for a package she never read and defended the man she'd started, quietly, to stop believing. So she didn't call. She set the phone face down on the desk, face down, still, always now, and she looked through the glass at the clean blank wall where the whiteboard used to be, and she told herself that not calling was patience. It wasn't patience. Patience has a plan and a clock. This was a woman bargaining with herself, trading a phone call she didn't make for 2 more days of not having to know, and the interest on that trade was going to come due in a boardroom on Thursday, in front of everyone, at a volume she would not be able to turn down. Across the street, I was on a client call with the door closed. I finished it, hung up, and my phone rang before I'd set it down. Sarah. The board review's underway, she said. Vegans 6 days in. Scope confirmed. Full check. All 7 positions. Okay. A pause on her end. That's it? Okay. What else is there? The board's called a meeting, Thursday. Full board, plus the verifier presenting findings. The chair's running it himself. Okay? Julian, you're not going to. Going to what? She thought about how to finish the sentence and then decided, the way Sarah decides things, that there was no honest way to finish it. Never mind, she said, and hung up. I understood the question she didn't ask. It's the one everybody wants answered in a story like this. Aren't you going to do something? Call the board, send the verifier a helpful file, make sure, twist the knife you've earned? And the answer, the whole answer, the answer that took me 12 years and 1 Tuesday to learn, is no. There was nothing to do. I'd done the only thing that was ever mine to do 3 months before any of this, when I signed a lease and kept my name on my own work. Everything after that belonged to Ethan. He submitted the packet, he filed the suit, he built the trail. An outside firm with no opinion about any of us was 6 days into walking that trail, and I did not need to stand at the end of it waving. Trails arrive on their own. I want to be precise about why, because I did nothing sounds like patience or wisdom, and it was neither. It was math. Anything I did now could only make it worse. If I called the board, I became a bitter ex-employee settling a score, and a bitter ex-employee is a story a good lawyer can work with. If I helped the verifier, I contaminated the finding. The single most powerful position available to me was the one I already had. A man across the street running a growing firm who had never said a word about Ethan's credentials to anyone who could act on them and didn't have to. Innocence isn't just cleaner, it's stronger. You cannot cross-examine a man who genuinely wasn't involved. So the discipline wasn't a virtue, it was a weapon, and the trick to it, the only hard part, was sitting still while it worked, which is much harder than it sounds when the person you're sitting still about is the one who wrote synergy twice into a press statement about your life's work. I picked up the next file. It was the Ashford account, a new one, a good one, the kind of client that a year ago would have signed with Hale Dynamics without a second call. They'd signed with me instead, and not because I chased them. Through the glass wall of my office, I could see the floor, my team, a real one now, and at a desk near the window, Anya Sharma. She'd started that week. The 90-day math had finally, for one person at least, come out in her favor, and I'd made good on a promise I made her in part 2 from a folding chair, when I had no idea whether I'd be able to keep it. That's the promise I'm proudest of in this whole story. Not the clever ones I knew I could keep, but the one I made anyway, in the dark, hoping. She'd resigned from Hale Dynamics on a Friday and started with me the following Monday. And when she walked in that first morning, she'd stood in the doorway a second too long, the way you do at the edge of a room you weren't sure you'd get to enter. You actually had a desk for me, she'd said. I told you Monday. People say Monday, they don't mean a desk. I meant a desk. She hadn't cried, which I respected, and she hadn't thanked me too much, which I respected more. She'd just found a desk with the best light without being told and started setting it up like she'd worked there for years. That's the kind of thing you can't hire for. You can only fail to fire it, which is precisely what Hale Dynamics had done. I'd made the calculation carefully when the runway finally allowed it. There were 4 people at Hale Dynamics I would have taken in a heartbeat, and I could afford exactly one, and I chose Anya, not because she was the most senior, she wasn't, but because she was the one who'd called me the day of the firing, scared and composed, and asked the honest question, for who? People remember who they were in the frightening hour. She'd been decent in it. Decency in the frightening hour is the only reference I've ever fully trusted, and it doesn't fit in a credential packet, and no outside verifier can confirm it, and it is worth more than all 7 of Ethan's positions combined, including the real ones. I passed her desk on my way to refill coffee. She'd organized it with the calm, ruthless efficiency that was her whole professional signature, and on the corner, in a small terracotta pot, she'd put a cactus. I stopped. I looked at it. It's a cactus, Anya said, looking up. I see that. I like things that don't need a lot of attention. Good quality in a plant, I said. And I almost said the rest of it. I stood there with the whole speech loaded and ready. Anya, that cactus is the most accurate organizational metaphor I have encountered in 12 years of corporate life. Low maintenance, survives neglect, thrives precisely where softer things die. Outlasts everyone who underestimates it and keeps no official record of having done so. I want you to know that I see exactly what you have put on that desk, and I approve of it more than I have approved of any strategic document in a year. I did not say any of that, because it would have been the single most on-the-nose thing anyone has ever said in an office, and I have said a great many on-the-nose things in offices, and a man has to draw the line somewhere. I nodded at her. She said, "Thanks," although I hadn't technically said anything worth thanking, which is its own small proof that she understood me fine. I went back to my office and closed the door. Through the glass, Anya bent back over her work, and the cactus sat on the corner of her desk, low maintenance, indestructible, keeping no record. The board meeting was in 2 days. She didn't know that. I did, and Sarah did, and somewhere in that building across the street, a woman was setting a phone face down instead of making a call, and a man was rehearsing certainty in the mirror, and an outside firm was on position 5 of 7. And I sat down at my own desk, under my own lead sign, and opened the next file, because the file was the only thing on Fenwick Street that actually needed me that afternoon. And I have always tried to give my attention to the thing that needs it. The things we do not say at work could fill a very good book. So could the things we do not do. Mine was already most of the way written, and I hadn't had to raise my voice once. Part 8. I wasn't in the room. That's the first thing to understand about the most important meeting of the year in my life. I was across the street on a client call with the door closed, and I did not watch a second of it, and that was not restraint. It was the whole design. A man who is in the room can be blamed for what happens in it. I had made very sure for 3 months to never once be in the room. So this is reconstructed from Sarah, from the 2 board members who talked afterward, from the way these things always travel. But it travels clean, because a lot of people were watching, and none of them will ever forget it. Eleanor got there early, the way she gets everywhere early. The board chair met her before the others had settled into their chairs. It wasn't the Hale Dynamics boardroom, it was a formal conference facility, outside board members flown in, a projector already warm against the far wall. The chair took her aside near the screen and said quietly, "Eleanor, before Ethan joins us, you should see the verifier's report." He clicked to a page. The projector threw it large on the wall, where everyone would eventually sit and read it, but for this minute it was just the 2 of them and the sentence in clean black type. Unable to confirm. 4 of 7 cited positions not found in public or professional records. 4 of the 7 line items were flagged in red. 4, Eleanor said. Not a question, just the number, out loud, to see if saying it changed it. 4. His representative submitted supporting documentation for 3 of them. We ran that too. The documentation couldn't be confirmed either. The chair let that sit. "Eleanor, is this what I think it is?" She didn't answer for a long time. The people who were in the room put it around 40 seconds, which is an eternity when a projector is humming and 7 board members are pretending to read their folders. 40 seconds of Eleanor Vance holding a printed report on the board's letterhead, reading 4 red lines and understanding, all at once, the way you understand a thing you've spent months arranging not to, that she had signed a cover letter vouching for this, put her name on it, sent it, herself, into the one body on earth whose entire function is to check the things people swear are true. She had asked him. That was the part that would keep her up. 2 days ago she'd sat in facing chairs and asked him directly, "Is everything in the packet accurate?" And he'd said yes, too fast, and she'd heard it come too fast, and she'd said, "Okay," and closed the door on it. She could have made 1 phone call that afternoon. Her thumb had been over the name. She chose 2 more days of not knowing. Now the not knowing was over, at the worst possible volume, in front of the whole board, on a screen she couldn't turn off. The chair watched her read it. He wasn't unkind. "You didn't know," he offered. It was almost a question, and it was the most generous thing anyone would hand her all day, an exit, a version where she was deceived rather than incurious. She looked at the 4 red lines a moment longer. "I didn't check," she said. A different sentence. The more honest one. The one that closed the exit. The chair heard the difference and wrote nothing down, but he heard it. "He's on his way up," she finally said. "He's in the elevator." "Okay." She did not put the report down. She held it, through the whole meeting, in both hands, the way you hold something you've decided to stop pretending you can't feel the weight of. And the door opened, and Ethan walked in, and he was, by every account, magnificent for 8 minutes. I mean that seriously. Everyone who described it to me described it the same way. He was good, he had a deck, he had a narrative. He took each flagged credential in turn and had a fluent, confident, entirely plausible explanation for the gap. A company that had been acquired and lost its records, a role that predated a database migration, a title that had been functional rather than formal. He was warm, he was unbothered. He made the verifier sound like a bureaucrat who didn't understand how modern careers actually worked, and for 8 minutes a few of the outside board members were visibly following him. That's the tragedy of Ethan Reed in one sentence. He was genuinely excellent at the 8 minutes. He had built an entire life out of the fact that most confrontations end inside 8 minutes, before anybody picks up a phone. The board chair let him finish the fourth credential. Then he said, "Ethan, I want to make sure I have this one right. You've listed Director of Strategic Partnerships at Confront, 2017 through 2019. That's correct, reporting to their VP of Business Development. It was a formative role. 2 years. 2 very good years. That's actually where I developed the ecosystem approach I've been bringing to Hale Dynamics." He said ecosystem in a board meeting about whether he existed, and not one muscle in his face knew it was funny. The chair nodded slowly, the way you nod at a man to give him just enough rope. "And before Corvent, you list a turnaround engagement, principal advisor, at a firm the verifier couldn't locate at all. Boutique shop, folded in the downturn. Half those places don't leave a footprint, you know how it was." "I do know how it was. I also know the ones that leave no footprint are hard to check." "Which is exactly the verifier's limitation, not mine." Smooth. He had an answer for everything, and the answers were good, and that was the problem. A man with an honest record doesn't need this many good answers. Honesty is boring under scrutiny. It just says, yes, call them. Ethan's fluency was itself the tell, if you knew to hear it, and the board chair had spent 30 years learning to hear it. "Let's go back to Corvent," the chair said. "The 2 very good years." "Happy to." And the board chair picked up his phone. He didn't make a speech about it. He didn't warn Ethan. He just picked up the phone off the table where it had been sitting the entire time, found the number he had clearly already looked up before the meeting, and dialed it, and put it on speaker in the center of the table. The room could hear it ring. Nobody breathed. Ethan's face, the 2 people who described it both reached for the same word without knowing the other had used it. Ethan's face went careful. Not scared, not yet. Careful. The face of a man who has just realized the 8 minutes are over and something else is starting. Something he has never rehearsed for, because it has never once in his life gotten this far. Someone answered. "This is the board chair at Hale Dynamics," the chair said, pleasant, unhurried. "I'm sitting with our board completing a routine credential verification. I have a candidate who lists a Director of Strategic Partnerships role at your firm, 2017 to 2019. The name is Ethan Reed. Can you confirm that for me?" A pause on the line. Paper or a keyboard. "Ethan Walsh?" said the voice. "I'm sorry, I don't have any record of a Ethan Reed in that role. Let me just double-check the..." A few seconds. "No. I don't see that name here at all. Not in partnerships, not in that window. Sorry." "Not a problem," the chair said. "You've been very helpful. Thank you for your time." He hung up. The quietest paragraph of the whole year is that one. There is nothing after he hung up. There was nothing in the room either. And then Ethan did the thing that finished him, not the fraud. The fraud was already finished. The phone had finished the fraud. He did the thing that finished the man. He stood up. He was the only person standing in a room of seated people. And if you have ever seen someone do that at the wrong moment, you know it is the loneliest posture there is. He challenged the verifier's methodology, outdated databases, poor cross-referencing, firms that don't keep clean records. He named 3 more companies, fast, that would absolutely confirm his record, and the board chair calmly wrote all 3 down. And Ethan watched him write them down, and understood that those calls would be made too, and kept talking anyway, because talking was the only tool he had ever owned, and he was not going to put it down now that it had stopped working. He swept the credential folder off the edge of the table. He said, "This is a political hit. This is legacy personnel using institutional access to take out someone who threatens the way they've always done things." He pointed at the board. Then he turned and he pointed at Eleanor and he said the sentence that cost him the last thing he had. "You let this happen." Eleanor's hands were flat on the table. She did not move them. She did not stand. She did not speak. She did not look at Ethan, and she did not look away. She looked at the middle distance, at the wall, at nothing, with her 2 hands flat on the polished table, and she let the room watch her do absolutely nothing at all. That nothing was the loudest thing she said in 9 months. Because Ethan was right. In the only way he'd been right about anything, she had let it happen. And her silence wasn't a defense of herself, and it wasn't a mercy to him. It was the sound of a woman finally declining, in public, to keep spending herself on the man she had fired the wrong person to protect. He needed exactly one thing in that moment, one ally, one voice, and she gave him the same thing he had taught her to give Julian. Nothing. Ethan left. The door closed behind him. It didn't slam. These doors don't. Here's the thing worth stopping on, because it's the whole shape of him. He stood up, not out of confidence, but out of its opposite. A man who has always won a room with presence, reaching for more presence at the exact moment presence stops working, because he does not know what else a person does. He escalated because escalation was his only remaining tool. Every soul in that room understood what they were watching. And Eleanor, hands flat on the table, understood it best of all, because she had been the room he practiced it on for the better part of a year. The board voted. It didn't take long. And then, in the due diligence package the board had assembled for the meeting, the deep file they build when a company is under this kind of scrutiny, a board member turned to a page near the back, read it, and slid it down the table to the chair without a word. It was old. It predated the framed founding filing on the wall of a boardroom across town. A private agreement from the leaky radiator year between two people who were going to build something together. The chair read one line of it aloud. Just one. In recognition of Julian Thorne as co-founder with the rights and standing thereof. Nobody explained it. Nobody had to. The room simply rearranged itself around a fact it had not known 30 seconds earlier, that the man they had all been discussing as a departed employee, a disgruntled ex-strategist, a lawsuit defendant, had been, on paper, from the beginning, something else entirely. That the firing they'd been treating as a personnel decision had removed a co-founder. And that the woman with her hands flat on the table had known that when she read a statement off a page on a Tuesday morning 9 months ago. Eleanor was still at the table when the others gathered their things. Her stack of company cards sat in front of her, squared where she'd set them at the start. She didn't pick them up. She looked at the wall. Across the street, I was hanging up a client call when Sarah rang. Board chair called the reference live, she said. I know. You know? I assumed it would go that way. It's what the phone is for in a room like that. Ethan only ever met people who didn't pick it up. Ethan left. Also expected. There was a pause, the kind Sarah takes when she's deciding how to hand you the real thing. The due diligence package had the founding agreement in it. One of them read a line out loud, the co-founder line. I didn't say anything for a moment. Not because it surprised me. I've known what that agreement said for 12 years. I signed it in a room with a leaking radiator when Eleanor and I were two people and a good idea. What got me was hearing it read aloud in a room I wasn't in, by strangers, to the woman who'd spent 9 months pretending it didn't exist. There's one more thing, Sarah said. A reporter from the trade weekly's been calling around all afternoon. Somebody on the board leaked the shape of it. They want the co-founder angle. They talked to me 3 weeks ago, I said. One quote. Before any of this. You gave a quote 3 weeks ago. One. On the record, boring, about the new firm. I figured it would matter eventually. I didn't know it would matter this week. I hadn't planned the timing. Nobody plans a board meeting's timing but the board. But a man who's kept his name on his own work his whole life learns to say one true, quotable sentence to a reporter, and then wait, the way you plan something in fall and forget about it until it comes up on its own schedule. Which board member? I said. Doesn't matter. The room went quiet. Okay. That's it? Okay. What else is there, Sarah? Eleanor's still in the room. Everyone else left. She's just sitting there. I know. I did know. I'd known that part longest of all, that the end of this, for her, wasn't going to be the lawsuit or the stock or the vote. It was going to be an empty room and a stack of cards she couldn't make herself pick up, and the specific silence of a building that no longer needed her to arrive early. We hung up. I sat at my desk a moment, and I didn't look out the window at the tower across the street where the lights were still on in a conference room, because there was nothing over there for me to look at that I hadn't already understood. Then I picked up the next file. The ash for the count. It needed me that afternoon, and Ethan Reed did not, and Eleanor Vance, for the first time in 12 years, was going to have to figure out what she needed, all on her own. Part 9. My phone rang a little after 8, and it was Sarah, and I already knew most of what she was going to say, which is the nicest way to take a phone call. The trade publication runs it tomorrow, she said. You gave them one quote. I know. I gave it 3 weeks ago, one sentence, before any of this. The founding agreement's in the footnote. They found it in the board's public filings after the review. Your name's... Sarah. She stopped. What are we doing tomorrow? There was the smallest pause, and then she laughed once, short, because she understood the question was the answer. The Ashford account. Kickoffs at 9. Good, I said. Let's do that. Then she told me the quote anyway, because Sarah knows me well enough to know when to override me, and she read it flat, without ceremony, the way you'd read a serial number. You said, I'm proud of what we built. The work speaks for itself, and it's still speaking. That's it. That's the whole quote. That's what I said. 3 weeks ago, before the board meeting, before the article was even a rumor. I didn't know when it would matter. I knew it would. A man who has kept his name on his own work his whole life learns to say one true and showy sentence to a reporter and then let it sit. The way you plant a bulb in the cold ground in October and don't think about it again until it comes up green on its own calendar, in April, without asking your permission. That was the whole conversation about the biggest article that would ever be written about me. I didn't ask her to read me more. I didn't ask which board member found the footnote or how it read on the page. There's a version of a man who needs to hear his own vindication out loud, slowly, twice, and I understand that man. I have been that man in smaller rooms. But I'd spent 12 years learning that the vindication you have to ask someone to read to you isn't worth as much as the file already open on your desk. The article would say what it said whether I savored it or not. The Ashford kickoff would not run itself. I want to tell you the truth about how it felt, because the revenge stories always lie about this part. It did not feel like winning. It felt like a record being corrected, which is a quieter thing and a colder one, and in the end, a better one. Winning implies there was a game and I enjoyed it. There was no game. There was a company I helped build over a decade with my name deliberately on the load-bearing parts because a man who's been poor once keeps the deed where he can reach it. Then there was a Tuesday and a page read aloud and 9 months of other people making the same mistake over and over in slightly larger rooms. The article at the end of it wasn't a trophy. It was just the first time anyone wrote it down correctly. You don't celebrate a correction. You just stop having to carry the error. I did allow myself one thing that morning before the register went quiet for good. I'd heard, through the professional Rappervine, which is more accurate than it has any right to be, that Ethan Reed had left the city. Sometime in the last 72 hours. No forwarding address anyone mentioned, no farewell post, no final performance. The man who had built an entire self out of being in the room had, at last, exited the room, and then the building, and then the map. Ethan Reed, transformation catalyst. Last seen transforming himself out of a board meeting and apparently the metropolitan area. I hope he lands somewhere with lower institutional scrutiny, a smaller pond, fewer people who check things, more social capital to spend before anyone asks for the receipts. I hope sincerely that he finds a room that will keep clapping for the length of the 8 minutes he's good for and then lets him leave before anyone picks up a phone. I'd spent a strange amount of a year thinking about a man I'd exchanged maybe 40 sentences with. That's the thing nobody warns you about a person like Ethan. He takes up a room's worth of space while contributing a napkin's worth of substance. And even after he's gone, the space stays warm a while, like a chair someone just stood up from. He never once beat me at anything because we never once actually competed. He pointed at a whiteboard while an outside firm walked, patiently, position by position, toward the truth. I didn't defeat Ethan Reed. I outlasted the 8 minutes. Everyone does, eventually. He just kept finding new rooms that hadn't started the clock yet. I wish him no specific ill. I wish him significantly reduced proximity. Those are different wishes, and I meant the second one entirely. Then I set it down. All of it, Ethan. The article, the 9 months, the whole taste of it. You'd be surprised how easy a thing is to set down once it's finally, provably done. Once there's nothing left in it that needs you. Through the glass wall of my office, the floor was full. Anya, at her desk near the window, the cactus on the corner exactly where she'd put it, still alive, still indestructible, keeping no record. A second analyst beside her now, a good one, hired last month. Phones ringing, a whiteboard on our wall too, except ours had an actual plan on it. The office had stopped smelling like the warehouse. It had started smelling like a place where work got done. It was real. It was mine. Nobody could read me off a page out of it. Anya had been with us 3 months now. She'd stopped standing in doorways a bit too long. The morning the article dropped online, a day early, as these things do, she'd forwarded it to no one and said nothing about it, and instead put a printed copy face down in my inbox with a single sticky note on the back. Page 4. It's spelled right. That was the entire commentary from the person who'd watched, from a cubicle across the street, the exact moment the spelling started getting fixed. She'd brought a cactus to that cubicle's replacement. She understood, better than anyone I employed, that the point was never the applause. The point was outlasting the people who doubted you, quietly, and keeping no record of it. I did not read page 4. I trusted her that it was spelled right. I picked up the Ashford file and opened it to the first page. Across the street, at more or less the same hour, Eleanor Vance was reading the article on her phone. She was alone in her office. She was alone in a way that was new, not the alone of an early arrival, the productive alone she'd built a career on, but the other kind, the kind where the building is full of people who no longer root their questions through you. Ethan's chair on the far side of the room was empty. it would stay empty. The conference room glass beyond her door was clean, blank, the whiteboard long since erased, as though 4 words and an arrow had never presided over anything. The office beyond her door had a particular sound that morning, or rather, it had lost one. For 9 months, the executive floor had carried a low current of people managing something. Hushed calls, doors closing a little too softly, the acoustic signature of an organization holding its breath. That was gone now. What replaced it was worse in its way, ordinary noise. The company had exhaled and moved on to the practical business of being smaller. Nobody was managing a crisis around her anymore. They were just working, and the working no longer rooted through her office, and she could hear that too, the specific quiet of being early to a building that had learned to start without you. She read the article once. It was a good piece, measured, sourced, the kind of trade journalism that doesn't editorialize because it doesn't have to. It laid out the year, the departure, the patents, the client migrations, the credential review, the board vote. And near the middle, in a sentence built to be quoted, it named Julian Thorne as co-architect of the growth decade that had made Hale Dynamics what it was. Not a former executive, not the strategist behind the CEO, co-architect. And in a footnote, dry and factual, it referenced a founding-era partnership agreement recognizing his standing, a document, the article noted, that had surfaced in the board's own due diligence review. She read that once, for the information. Then she looked up. On the wall across from her desk hung the founding day document, matted in cream, framed, hung the year they opened, back when the office was 1 floor and a leaking radiator and the pronoun was we. She had walked past it 10,000 times. People assumed his name was on it. It wasn't. That was the public filing, and the public filing had only ever carried hers. But the other thing, the private thing, the thing signed in the radiator year between 2 people and a good idea, that had been on file the whole time too, in a drawer, in a record, waiting with the infinite patience of true things for someone whose job it was to check. She looked at the founding day document on her wall for a long moment. Then she looked back down at her phone and she read the article a second time. The first read had been information. The second read was the other thing. I wasn't there, and I'll never know exactly what crossed her face, and I've decided that not knowing is correct, that some griefs shouldn't have an audience, even a narrator. But I know what she was reading, on the second pass, and I know it wasn't the sentence about me. On the second pass, you don't read the new fact, you read yourself. You read every door you closed rather than walked through, the signature you didn't check, the whiteboard you didn't erase, the question you asked and flinched from, the call your thumb hovered over and didn't make. You read the whole quiet policy of surrender you'd been calling patience, and you see it, finally, in print, in someone else's measured prose, corrected. She did not take the photo down. That's the part I keep coming back to, the part that tells you she understood it completely. She could have taken it off the wall, no one would have blamed her, no one was watching, the man in it was across the street and no longer took her calls. She left it up. She let the founding day document stay exactly where it had always hung, in a version of the story that was now, permanently and publicly, corrected. Whatever that cost her to live there, she paid it, alone, at her desk, and it was the first genuinely honest thing I'd watched her do in 9 months, and I only watched it in my imagination, because I had a kickoff at 9. She set the phone face down on the desk, the old habit, turning the screen over so the thing on it couldn't look back at her. She'd been doing it for 9 months, first with client transfer emails, then a stock ticker, then a verification report, and now with a sentence that finally named the man she'd read off a page. Face down. As though a fact you can't see is a fact you haven't fully agreed to yet. There was nothing else on the desk with her. A pen, an empty coffee cup gone cold hours ago, the small stack of her own company cards squared at the corner where she'd set them down after the board meeting, and so far, left. She didn't reach for any of it. The coffee had been cold for a long time. In that building, it always was now. It had become, somewhere back around the patent printout, a kind of policy. She looked at the wall. There would be consequences passed this morning, and they would be real, and they would not be dramatic. Her position was under review. The company would be smaller for a long time and quieter, and it would learn to arrive early on its own. She would not call me, and if she did, I would be kind and brief and unavailable, and we both already knew that, which is why she wouldn't. There was no scene left to play between us. There had been one, once, in a glass room, and she'd read it off a page. And across the street, I was at my desk, under my own lit sign, the one you could see clearly through her window if you happened to look, which I hoped she wouldn't, because there was nothing over here for her either, just a man and a file and a floor full of people who'd chosen to follow the work to wherever the work actually lived. She built something. I helped build it. For 12 years, the story got told with one name on it, and now the record says both, and that is not a triumph and it is not a revenge. It is just true. The truth was always in the drawer. I didn't reveal it. I didn't have to. I signed the lease 3 months early, kept my name on my own work, said stay in touch to the people who'd earned it, gave one boring quote when a reporter asked, and then I went to lunch, and dinner, and the next kickoff, and the next, and I let a slow and disinterested machine, a board, a verifier, a journalist, a market with no feelings, walk the trail that other people had laid, all the way to the sentence that finally said it right. There's a temptation, at the end of a story like this, to stand at the window and look at the tower across the street and feel the size of what happened. I understand the temptation. I'd earned the look, if any look was ever earned. A woman fired me to make room for a man who impressed her, and inside a season she'd lost the man, the clients, a fifth of the company's value, and the one story she told about who built it. It was, by any measure, a complete reversal, and it was arranged so that I never once had to be the one who reversed it. The window was right there. All I had to do was turn my chair.